Sing for Science is made possible in part by support from Science Sandbox, an initiative of the Simons Foundation. Today's episode was co-produced by Inscience, a nonprofit organization that promotes science and evidence-based medicine in Ukraine. For more information about their work, please visit inscience.io.
The main for me from last years, I made some kind of conclusion that the main purpose maybe of this tragedy is to make some lessons for humanity. And I think these lessons are so epic, so enormous. And it's not just about nuclear power. It's not just about science. It's about memory. It's about might of people.
Yeah. Натискати. Відлік. Тільки. Майбутнє. Готовий.
Welcome to Sing for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Today we'll be speaking with Nata Zhyzhchenko of the band Onuka. Onuka is one of the most popular bands in Ukraine, and their songs combine traditional native instruments with electronic music. Onuka's song Vidlik translates to countdown in Ukrainian and was written about the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster that led to the premature deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Also joining us today is radiobiologist Olena Pareniuk. Olena is a senior researcher at the Institute for Safety Problems of Nuclear Power Plants and a professor at the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine. For 10 years, she has been studying bacteria in the contaminated soil from the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which was recently occupied by the Russian army. The title of today's episode on the podcast is Vidlik, Surviving Chernobyl and Russian Occupation in Ukraine. Hello, Nata and Olena. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hello.
Hi.
So you're both in Kyiv right now, is that right?
Yes, but I'm near Kyiv. It's some kind of suburb of Kyiv, but it's very close to the center.
And what's it like there today?
As for me, it's very cozy, and the spring is coming. Everything is so green, and at last we have some sun, and it really made me feel like everything is gonna be all right. But Kyiv is so blossoming, it's full of energy, full of people, full of volunteers, and the energy is circulating, and I feel like I'm home.
Oh, okay, good. And here in New York, in the United States, I've had the privilege of only knowing peace. So you live in the reality of violence and war. Is that something that you experience day to day?
Well, today we had only one air raid alarm, so it was a great spring day. We spent it outside, not in the shelters. That is quite nice.
When I heard it, I said, long time no see, because we had no alarms for a couple of days, and maybe we missed them in some pervert way, because we adjusted to this context of war, context of alarms, context of shelters, and this is our life now, this is our existence, and really we adjusted to it, and it's our reality now.
Mm-hmm.
My son is 3 years old, and he doesn't go to kindergarten yet. That's why he doesn't know what shelter look like. Only in the beginning of war we had some situation when we had to sit there, but he isn't used to sit there, so he just knows the sound of alarm. That's it.
Okay. And Nata, you've continued playing music with your band. You've continued touring, writing, rehearsing, performing. all during the occupation. What's that like?
I think that this is the second chance to live, to believe, to know what your purpose is. Because when the war started, at first we said goodbye to our lives, with our future. But then, when we adjusted to the situation in some way, we said goodbye to our careers, our performances, because we just had to live and to exist in some way. And when everything was in some kind of balance in a few weeks maybe, and we understood that we can have charity tours, charity gigs, we understood that we had a second chance to perform. And I felt that all my band was like blossoming on the stage, because they had the second chance to live on the stage, and every concert was like the last time. I felt their background, their energy, because they made everything on 100%. And this synergy between audience and between my musicians and me was a new energy. I had never felt such kind of this synergy before.
Wow.
It's another experience, and I think that when you have another chance to live and to perform and to do what you like, it's like a second day of your birth, literally.
Yes, I have to take your word for it. Like I said, this is nothing that we've ever experienced here in the United States. Have you left Ukraine and come back with the band? Have you toured outside during the war?
Yes, we had a tour via United States and in Europe. But the trip, the road is really hard, because we have no planes in Ukraine now till the end of war. That is why it's very long adventure to go somewhere with a band, maybe 3 days in a road for one performance. And it's really exhausting, but it's also our reality, and we adjusted to it also. And thank God we have a possibility to perform in a full way of our performing like it was before the war, with all my equipment, with all my technician guys, and to perform like it was in peacetime.
Anastasia, the woman that set up this episode today, she had told me that it's difficult for men to leave the country and come back.
Yes, it's really a big issue to leave the country, especially now. Some time ago, we had a permission from the Ministry of Culture, which was also very formal. It was a long period of bureaucracy, but you just have this like a visa. You can leave and return in some days, in a couple of days after this gig. But now they have some issues, and they make it more difficult. Now mobilization is much more in high way. I don't know, maybe it's incorrect in English, but a lot of people, men and musicians, are also go to the front line. That is why it's harder to live, even if you're a well-known musician.
As I was saying earlier, what's unique to your band's sound is that you incorporate traditional Ukrainian instruments. And in particular, in this song, what's so fascinating is this instrument that's featured in this song. It has a giant rope, or I guess you told me it was horsehair. What is the name of this instrument?
The name of this exact instrument is buhay. It's called by the name of bull, animal bull, or a bird with big wings. So it makes the sound very close to the sound of this instrument. But it's two theories, like the name after bull and the name after this bird. But it's a very ancient one, and it was used just like a percussion on different celebrations, holidays, and a musician had to moisture his hand with a beer and to pull this rope to make friction more tight. And the form of the wooden instrument was used to make cheese, like cottage cheese. So you can imagine this kind of smell from this instrument, cottage cheese with beer, and
It stinks.
yeah, it's really scent or something worse. But now we use just a water. And of course, it's contemporary instrument. It's modern one. It's made especially for me from a new wood. And I always liked the way this instrument looks because it was very unique from childhood. I have seen it in the workshop of my grandfather, who was a well-known master of wooden music folk instruments, and I was overwhelmed by the way this instrument looks, and I wanted to hear the sound of it, and it was so weird, so awkward, and I recollected it for my entire life. And when we started to make some kind of new EP, I said to Eugen, to my husband, to my sound producer, that I want to use this kind of sound, this kind of noise, and to make a bass line based on just on the pure sound of this buhai. And we even invited the musician from National Orchestra who plays this instrument. He made a lot of different samples, and we chose the most melodic one and sampled it, and it became to be like a bass line.
Yes.
And it was the bass structure, and then we began to add something else, and I wanted it to be minimal, just to make this buhai play solo, to dedicate the track to this instrument, because for my opinion it is used very not serious in our national and folk music, like just maybe some kind of amusement. And I wanted to
Like a joke.
Like a joke, yes. And I wanted to make this instrument play solo. So I think that my weird idea worked, and it sounds like folk techno. And I think that this instrument really reminds sound of some synthesizer, but it's made from wood and from horse's hair.
It doesn't sound humorous. It's very menacing.
Yeah, like ominous,
Yeah.
eerie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have any other instruments that you can demonstrate for us today in your studio?
Yeah, I have my sopilka.
Okay.
This is wooden flute. I think that's this kind of symbol of Ukraine. I think that a lot of cultures has wooden flutes, but in Ukraine it plays great role because it's very ancient, it's very lyrical, very sad, and it's like a magician tool for me because you can play anything on this flute, and it's very tiny, very gentle, but it can make a great impression maybe. And it is made from wood by my grandfather's student, because my grandfather has passed away and I have no instrument of his like sopilka.
Okay.
This is my concert instrument. I perform it, so this is my main treasure maybe, and I have it with me all the time, and I had in my luggage when we had to evacuate. So it was maybe the first thing was my son, and the second was my dog, and the third was this sopilka.
Okay.
I can play some tune maybe to hear that.
Please, please. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such a beautiful instrument. And so it was first your son, second dog, third the instrument, fourth your husband?
Yes, something like that. Or husband took us with him. Maybe we were 3 luggages of him.
Okay, I see. Fair enough. What can you tell us about Vidlik? I've read some of the interviews. I know that it translates to countdown, but I know that you meant many different things. Could you tell our listeners about that?
I am a fan of Kraftwerk. I think that a lot of my fans know about it, and I think that it sounds like I'm their fan. And I wanted to make some kind of Ukrainian techno when you can use Ukrainian language, but in some weird structure. I think it's hard to explain, but all the forms of lyrics is in infinitive form, and it's incorrect in Ukraine. Like, I want to breathe, for example, there I want breathe without any prepositions. It's just all the words are in infinitive form. But you can understand the sense of these 4 lines. And the sense of it, I want to breathe. I press countdown. I am ready for the future. I stop the conversation. The plot is very simple. And I think that when I had this idea, I thought that this could be the voice of our nuclear power plant, which is so exhausted with these experiments, with this incorrect guide and incorrect behavior. So it was like a voice of hurt Chernobyl power plant for me.
Okay, so you're personifying the reactor as an intelligent entity, and it's issuing the commands. Is that right?
Yes, and it talks by Google Talk. It doesn't use my voice even, and it's like an irony of fate when the most famous track of mine, it's without my voice.
Oh, interesting. Well, this is the irony of popular music.
Yeah. That's it.
And so you had a real personal connection to the accident. Your father was a liquidator, is that right?
Yes, he was liquidator, and he was a physician and engineer, and his work was to uncommutate 3rd and 4th blocks. So he was like an engineer who worked on a commutation and tried to...
What does that mean?
They had to disconnect 3rd and 4th blocks of this power plant, because they had mutual, як сказати, управління, да?
Control room.
Yeah, they had mutual control room, but they had to separate the herd block from the second one.
I see.
Because they thought that it would work without this herd block, and they thought that whole station would continue working on. And it worked for some time, but then it was stopped and closed. And
it worked till 2000, so it worked like more than 13 years after the accident.
The power plant did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did not know that. Okay. HBO just released a documentary called The Lost Tapes. It actually, it seems to make the argument that the fall of the USSR was directly connected to the accident of Chernobyl. Like, is that how you experienced it during your childhood?
I heard such kind of thought that it was like the last nail to the roof of the coffin. Sorry, in Soviet system.
Yes.
And I was little. I was only 1 year old, so I can experience it only from my parents' conversations and some historical events, evidences. And I think that that's true, because the scale of tragedy and scale of liquidation was so huge, and they couldn't cover up these facts because it was really huge. It was unbelievable and impossible to cover it.
Because they tried to cover it up.
This was the last huge tragedy which just ended it.
Okay.
That conclusion that I can have from documentaries, from some evidences, but I wasn't a witness of this time. I was
Okay.
too little.
Very young. Olena, you were around the same age, yes? Very little.
Yeah, I was born in 1987.
Okay.
So I didn't even experience the accident itself.
Okay.
And also talking about these theories, it's necessary to know that it costed a fortune. The liquidation, all of the process of the liquidation of Chernobyl accident cost like $20 billion during 1986.
Wow.
And then every next year it cost $13 billion on 1987, and then it laid it was a great burden on the economy of newborn Ukraine because it cost us every year, it cost us like $5 to $6 billion, and Ukraine had a really terrible crisis in 1990s, and Nata and I, we experienced that crisis because it was quite bad, and yet Ukraine had to spend a fortune on liquidation of the consequences of Chernobyl. Anyway, we learned a lot. Ukraine and the whole world learned a lot from this accident. So we kind of paid a very high price for the knowledge.
Yeah. And most of your work, Olena, is done at the site itself. And one of my favorite visuals from this film is the recent footage that shows the overgrowth that dominates the exclusion zone. Is it easy for Ukrainians to visit the site today? Or is it still blocked off?
Today, it's very difficult because it is mined.
Oh, right.
So Russians penetrated Ukraine through the exclusion zone. It was one of the routes. On February 24th, they entered the exclusion zone, and then they were there until the end of March. So basically for 1 month. And they did it because there was a Chernobyl National Biosphere Reserve.
Biosphere Reserve, yes?
Yeah. In Ukrainian territory, we don't have the exclusion zone anymore. It is a Biosphere Reserve already. And in Belarus, they also have this kind of reserve. And two reserves combined together, they were the biggest biosphere reserve in Europe. So it's like a huge swampy territory. So it is the huge territory that was open for animals, and animals were migrating from Ukraine to Belarus, and there were no borders, basically, because it's, reserve. And Russians entered also because there are some really good roads going from Kyiv, from Ukraine to Belarus, so they used those roads. And they stayed in the exclusion zone for 1 month. They made trenches in the most contaminated part of the exclusion zone, which is really outrageous. I mean, it's outrageously stupid because they lived in the contaminated soil. So they dug it themselves and they made a decision themselves to live in the radionuclide contaminated soil, to stay there. And of course, they mined all of the territory. And right now, the exclusion zone is under military control. And we have a really dark and bad jokes that Ukraine has no capacity to demine the territory. So probably animals will be the ones who will demine the territory in the exclusion zone.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah, we are not even talking about ordinary people, about the public. They needed the permission to come to the exclusion zone before the war. But right now, even scientists who are working in the exclusion zone, we need the permissions both from the administration of the exclusion zone and from military administration of the exclusion zone.
So could you tell us a little bit about when you first went back to work after the occupation, what you found in your laboratory?
Well, being honest, war really changed my work, obviously, because I've been working quite a lot in the lab. Like I've been taking some samples from the outside, from the environment, and then I've been working in the lab before the war. But then when the war started, my vice director evacuated the institute. I wasn't in the institute because we had a quarantine and quite a lot of people were working from their homes.
A COVID quarantine.
Yeah. It's like this joke, the plague, the war, yet you have to come to work. So now I'm mostly working from home because my sampling locations were not demined, and I'm not brave enough, to do it by myself.
Understandably.
So I will just prefer to stay at home. And also I'm taking some samples from the inside of the Chernobyl sarcophagus. But right now it's also quite difficult because of some administrative problems, because we need to get new permissions to work with radioactivity. So basically I'm working from home, and I'm doing quite a lot of international work because obviously the war made Ukrainian science a part of the European science, and we have to apply for more projects. We have to study the consequences of the accidents that luckily didn't happen. So we are extensively studying the consequences of the occupation of the exclusion zone, and we are studying the occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So basically, just trying to analyze what will happen and how will it affect the radiation safety of the whole world, because obviously the radiation safety laws should be reconsidered and rewritten.
And the sarcophagus, when you talk about the sarcophagus, is that the big smokestack where the fire happened?
Yeah. So the sarcophagus, it's like matryoshka. So inside there is a destroyed reactor. Then on the top of the destroyed reactor, there is the sarcophagus, that scary image that was constructed during a couple of months in 1986 and 1987. And then we have the new safe confinement. It is the new arch. It's really beautiful. So it is covering the sarcophagus because sarcophagus might collapse, and the new safe confinement can contain all of the consequences. Yeah, but we are taking samples from the premises near the reactor because we are studying high dose radioactivity, and I find it really fascinating and interesting and can talk about it for ages.
Well, please begin.
Well, I'm studying bacteria, I'm studying microorganisms. And the most fascinating thing about the microorganisms is that it's like the tools of the nature. For example, plants create some matter from the sunlight, water, and the minerals, and then animals are eating plants. But we need something to deconstruct, to demolish all of the dead bodies of plants and animals. And it is exactly bacteria. And bacteria they are demolishing not only organic matter, but also inorganic. So bacteria can eat concrete, steel, uranium. So they are, just corroding and decomposing everything. So when you're studying bacteria, you can tell what processes are ongoing in the environment because you just see those processes. And there is some exact tool for each substance that need to be deconstructed. So basically, something that is very interesting for me in Chernobyl is that only 36 years ago, Chernobyl was sterile. So the premises of the power unit, there were no microorganisms because of the high radioactivity and high temperature and, the nuclear reaction that was ongoing. But then after 36 years ago, the microbiome, it is a community of bacteria, is huge over there. And there are also some bacteria that evolved and they are able to accumulate cesium. It is one of the dose-forming radionuclides. They're also able to accumulate uranium. And it is fascinating because we can see the evolution by our own eyes. Because obviously, before the accident, in the environment, there were no bacteria that were able to accumulate uranium because we had no free uranium. But then somehow the uranium appeared and bacteria were able to create the mechanism to actually use it in their life cycle.
When you say accumulate, you mean that they can ingest it?
They are consuming. Yeah, they are
absorb.
Okay, I see.
they're taking it inside their cells. We cannot say that they eat uranium, but
Is the biome in the exclusion zone, how is it different from the biome in a spot where there hasn't been contamination by radioactivity?
if you are talking about the environment, I mean, about the forest, it's not that different because the doses, they are quite low. So, of course, there is a radionuclide contamination and it altered the environment. But after 36 years, environment adjusts.
Sure.
And as Carlin used to say, like, nature is fine. It's we are not fine.
Did you say Carlin?
Yeah.
George Carlin?
Yeah.
The comedian. Yeah, did you hear that joke? He said the reason why God invented humans was because he just really wanted styrofoam peanuts.
Yeah. And the plastics. There was the contest for artists. We wanted to draw something on the wall of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And the picture that won was actually George Carlin, who was saying, I'm sorry for swearing, he said, like, nature is fine, we are fine. But all in all, there were some nice Przewalski horses and forest and stuff, but we know in our hearts what should have been there.
George Carlin. Before we get too much further, could you define what a radionuclide is for our listeners?
A radionuclide is the atom that has some excess energy and it is decaying, releasing the energy. So we can talk about the physics of this process, but something that is interesting for us is that it releases energy or particle, and that is how it can be dangerous. The radionuclide itself can be dangerous for the environment.
Okay. And one thing I've always wanted to know, and this is something that I noticed in the, that I was reminded of in the HBO documentary, why does a Geiger counter make that sound when it's reading high levels of radioactivity?
Well, it doesn't need to make the sound. It's just, you can turn the sound off. It's just for you.
Oh.
I mean, the counter is counting the ionization. So there is a chamber inside of it. And when the ion hits the substance in the chamber, it generates a small flash. And then some detector detects the flash. And it just counts the amount of flashes, like the sparkles.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so a Geiger counter making this sound just to draw the attention of the person who is looking, on the Geiger counter.
So it could be a trumpet. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
I see.
No, it doesn't matter.
And that was another thing that I noticed in the film was that the footage had flashes in it when they were filming the contaminated zone.
Yeah, because the ions, the charged particles hit the film and it destroyed some tiny parts of the film. And then that is why there were some flashes.
Okay. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you do your experiments, just the day to day when you're studying the soil.
Well, I'm not only studying the soil. I used to study the soil, but then I moved to substances with higher radioactivity. And we are joking that the more radioactivity is, the more interesting it is for us.
Like junkies, radioactivity junkies.
Yeah, exactly. But we have, all of the official permissions.
Okay.
So basically, now we are studying samples from the sarcophagus. We are taking not me personally, because the dose rates in the sarcophagus are way too high. So we have the colleagues, they are older than 60 years old and they have a great experience. So we are studying the map of the destroyed unit. We are studying the map of the radioactive lava that was generated because of the accident. And then we are deciding that, okay, we want to take samples here, here, and here. And then my colleagues would say, like, your wonderful, wonderful idea, I won't go there, it's too radioactive, so you have to pick another point. And I'm like, please, please, please. And they're like, okay, we will be fast.
Did I read that you said you had to hire snipers to shoot it with bullets to break off the lava?
Not anymore. I mean, at our institute, they used to do it back in 1990s. So it was like a glass. It was lava containing concrete, sand, bentonite, uranium, steel. So everything that was thrown into the reactor, the very high temperature, very high pressure, it melted into lava and then it cooled down. And then it was really, really, glass-like substance and very hard to take the samples. But now, after 36 years, due to chemical and biological corrosion, it's actually possible, just to take the sample with a spoon because it corroded. And we have the problem, and it was a big issue during the occupation because this radioactive lava is dry because of the new safe confinement that was installed. The humidity inside of the sarcophagus got lower, and this radioactive lava started to be destroyed. It because of the high temperature, so it's still like 35 degrees centigrade, the temperature of it. So it turning into dust, and then this dust can be lifted easily. And there are a lot of neutron sources. And there is a very, very highly unlikely possibility that we can have the self-sustaining chain reaction inside the sarcophagus. That is why it is extremely important to monitor everything that's going on in the sarcophagus because, we can have the chain reaction. And, it's not a joke. It's very dangerous. So our institute, my colleagues, they are monitoring it, and they've been monitoring it even under the occupation because you cannot command to radionuclides like, come on, guys, we have the war, you should stop decaying. It's not like
Were they staying on site during the Russian occupation?
Some of them. So mostly we are working together with employees of Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which is not the power plant per se. It's not generating energy. It's just, the name of the organization. So they were collecting the data and transmitting, when it was possible, they were transmitting data to my colleagues, but then it became impossible because Russians they took the phones and they cut the internet connection and they banned all of the connection from people.
But how do you feel about the use of nuclear power? Do you think that is something that could help stall climate change? Do you think that that's a good idea, that we continue to use nuclear power?
I'm a very pro-nuke person because, if thinking about the distant future, it's quite obvious that the best source of the energy that we can use is sun. But we cannot get the energy from sun directly like plants do. But we can invent some kind of technology. For example, solar batteries, they are not that efficient, unfortunately, and they are quite toxic. The batteries itself.
And they're not recyclable.
Yeah. So we still have to invent something. But for inventing this something, we need the energy. And nuclear power plants is the best option for this, period of time when we will be inventing something that is environmentally friendly. So yeah, I think it's a great option.
So that is possible to have nuclear power that is environmentally friendly.
Well, we have the sun. It's a nuclear power, and it's
yes,
for sure environmentally friendly.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about was I've read that you said that your mission is to come up with a strategy to overcome nuclear terrorism. How does that connect with your work as a radiobiologist?
Well, it is complicated, being honest. Usually I prefer joking about my work. And I think that when scientist jokes, it's much easier to understand what the scientist is doing.
Sure.
But right now, we barely lost the privilege of joking, because just yesterday I had a lecture about the how to survive the nuclear bomb attack. And I was joking, and it was creepy, when someone is joking, like, come on, if you're in the ground zero, you can just relax. Nothing will happen. You will be dead anyway.
Yes.
So answering your question, I had to pause my research. So it was 2 days ago when I actually wrote something about my research, about my bacteria, and I was very happy about it. But before that, We are scientists and we are employed by our society, like we are getting salaries from state budget, and we have to somehow, if the society has a demand, we have the answer on this demand, we have to do everything that we can to answer the demand. So coming back to radiation safety and to countering the nuclear terrorism, now, unfortunately, it is quite obvious that it is possible to steal the nuclear power plant. And just today, the mine exploded near the power unit in Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. It is outrageous. I mean, the mine exploded on the territory of the nuclear power plant. Come on, it's impossible. And that is what nuclear terrorism. So Russians are just blackmailing us. And I think that the mission of my colleagues and me is to do everything that we can to prevent it from happening anywhere else again. Like never, ever again.
So we've got just a few minutes left. Are there any questions that you have for one another? Nata, Olena, anything that you both want to talk about?
If I can ask Nata, what do you feel about nuclear energy? I mean, is it scary for you as an artist, or does it inspire you?
It's both. I think that it inspires me a lot, and it's weird, but zone inspires me a lot. I had visited it for many times, and I had never felt such kind of calm inside me, and I like everything about it. I like this Pripyat shadows. I like this blossom in nature. I like these animals, because I saw weird animals there and I met there, just like they faced me, and it was the great impression for me. And I like people who work there. They're heroes for me. I like everything about liquidation in I mean that I think that it's really heroes that were in 1986 and now. And when it was occupation, it was some kind of that my personal zone was raped. It was unbelievable for me to believe that all history, all sacrifices, all our data, all our research were raped by these orcs, by these animals. It's not human if they can trace and dig themselves into polluted soil. So you can see the level of their consciousness. It's so low, and it was so hard to hear what they left in the plant, stole almost everything, that they made some stupid, like they were trying to cook hares and rabbits just in some cabinets, that it's like weird barbarians. Why? And the most painful for me was that despite of all political moments, it's our mutual memory, because it was also a part of Soviet Union. It happened in Ukraine, but a lot of liquidators were from Belarus, from Russia. It was a long time ago, and it was our mutual tragedy and our mutual sacrifices, and they raped their own memory. They don't think about it because they don't think about anything. They can't think because they have no organ to think, I think. It's hard, but it's so huge topic to learn, to dig, and I think it's some kind of also prediction for humanity, and it for me, it changed the way of our history of all mankind without any loud words. For me, it's so.
You see, that is why Ukrainians as a society are very resilient. In everything, we see lessons. Lessons learned. We will prevail and do something better next time. And I just wanted to say that is exactly, I mean, when Nata said that we felt raped, that is exactly how all of the employees of the exclusion zone felt. It was very difficult to return back to our offices because, I mean, as my boss used to say, he was saying about the equipment, but anyway, we can expand it also to people. Once you're importing something to the exclusion zone, you will never be able to take it out of the exclusion zone. So we were talking about the equipment, and he was trying to explain me, like, if I will buy the centrifuge, I will have to leave it in the exclusion zone. But then the same goes to people. So once a person enters the exclusion zone, that's it. You're in love. You will return back there. If you have the right soul, the right state of mind, you will stay in the exclusion zone.
Well, I can't thank you both enough for this experience. It's been such an honor to share this time with you. I'm so grateful. I wish you both the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for invitation. Було приємно познайомитись.
Stay up to date with Nata and her band Onuka by visiting their website onuka.ua. You can learn more about Olena and her work by visiting her LinkedIn profile or her institute's website isnpp.kiev.ua. Today's episode was developed with Anastasia Krasnoshon and Inscience, a non-profit organization that promotes science and evidence-based medicine in Ukraine. For more information about their work, please visit inscience.io. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from Science Sandbox, an initiative of the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panoram, digital producer is Keenan Cush, mix engineer is Lou Carlozo, and our social media manager is Bailey Constas. If you liked today's episode, please tell a friend about the show and give us a review. For more information, go to singforscience.org and follow us on social media at Sing for Science. Thanks for listening.